Good day, my name is Blue Suit and today I'll be going over my review of the turn-based story-driven monster taming JRPG adventure game known as Monster Hunter Stories 2 Wings of Ruin. In Monster Hunter Stories 2, you befriend a cast of giant monsters to help you battle and explore your way through a story of prejudice and redemption. Long ago, there was a fabled monster rider who saved the world from a dire cataclysm. Now, generations later, you are the destined grandson of that rider. Wings of Ruin's tale shows the parallels and connections between your grandfather's life and your own as you try to quell a similar cataclysm in your time. The story here is one of the game's several high points. Its characters are mostly well written and memorable, with some truly fun scenes to watch. When the game begins, you'll make your way through a lengthy but necessary tutorial, and from that, the pacing of the story really begins to slow down. My problem with the story really feeds into my overall chief complaint with Monster Hunter Stories 2, and that's its repetitiveness. Even with the fun dialogue, its delivery becomes quite dry as you perform the exact same quest formula over and over. You speak to the village chief, you ride out to a new part of the map to kill a monster, and then you fast travel back to take on a new quest. After you've knocked out a dozen or so of these quests, you get to move on to a new zone with all new monsters and start over. Fortunately, Wings of Ruin offers a ton of side quests to mix up the main story, from monster slaying, item gathering, arena battles, and multiplayer quests, and many more. Repetitiveness and grinding is somewhat of a staple of the Monster Hunter franchise, and as a longtime fan of the series, I will say that Wings of Ruin isn't any more grindy than other Monster Hunter games, but if you're new to the series, it might take you by surprise. Beyond the story, there are two major systems at work that separate this from other monster taming games. The first and most exciting of these is the actual combat. At its foundation, battles take place as a turn-based match of rock, paper, scissors, where speed beats power, power beats technical, and technical beats speed. Capcom has taken that simple formula and added in every variable they could think of to make it as engaging and fun as possible. In addition to speed, power, and technicality, you can also choose up to 3 weapons you can switch in battle that do 3 different damage types. Some monsties might be weak to slashing, while some it's piercing. And just like in the flagship Monster Hunter games, most larger monsters have different resistances for their different parts, such as their tails and their horns. And just as you have your weapons, your monsters can learn skills that they can use in battle to dish out elemental damage or inflict status effects. Finally, there's your kinship meter that fills up as you fight alongside your monster, allowing you to unleash huge, devastating attacks on your foes. The combat in Monster Hunter Stories 2 was definitely what got me so addicted to this game, as battles aren't just Magikarp-used splash, but they're about your knowledge of the enemy and whether or not you can remember that Anjanaths use speed-based attacks until they enrage, and then they use strength-based attacks. Then you gotta pick the right damage type to really punish the enemy, possibly even breaking off its parts for extra rewards. And the second really big system that's equally important is the monster hatching and customization. Along your travels, you will inevitably find a ton of monster eggs that you'll haul back to camp to hatch and marvel at. Finding new monsters is always a treat, and in every new zone you'll run into some that just have to be on your team. When you hatch them, they'll receive a couple random modifiers, and based on the rarity of their eggs, they will have their basic genes, plus a couple more if you're lucky. I do wish that the stat modifiers were more clear, however, as it's not really easy to tell what your monster's offensive and defensive stats actually are. I'd like to know more so I can better min-max my team like I would in other Monster Hunter titles, but it seems like Wings of Ruin just isn't that kind of game. What's so addicting about the hatching, however, is that you can get rid of your monsters in order to take one of their genes and give it to another monstie who has an open slot. And because it's so limitless, you can give elemental attacks and abilities to monsties that don't normally have them. Or you can stack like genes together to increase the potency of their skills and abilities overall. Monster Hunter Stories 2 boasts near infinite gameplay, and this is where it gets a lot of that longevity, as there's no end to the combinations of genes and monsters that you could put together. This also feeds into the game's repetitiveness, however, as finding the right genes will require players to farm the same monsters over and over until enough of their eggs have dropped. This entire system, along with the multiplayer, however, doesn't even unlock until you're several hours into the game, so expect a long, slow burn in the game's introductory chapter before it opens up and allows you to get into some gene splicing. The last thing that's worth mentioning is the multiplayer, which certainly has its pros and cons. For starters, it was a fun and stable experience overall, especially for a system that felt so unnecessary at first. Combat is slowed down a bit compared to the solo experience, as many players will need time to make decisions in a turn-based environment, but it was still much smoother than what I expected. When you take on a mission together, you're transported to a small multiplayer map where you can complete objectives and quick one-off missions that don't impact the main game. The major downside to the multiplayer is that it's such an afterthought for almost the entire game, until the end when you can take on Wings of Ruin's more challenging beasties together. So if you're expecting to play through the story together with a friend, think again. You can pick up Monster Hunter Stories 2 Wings of Ruin on Steam and Nintendo Switch for $60. It has a few rough stretches of gameplay, but for players who don't mind the grind to capture their favorite monsters and raise them into endearing, unique companions, this game is going to be a huge win. It comes with a full 40-hour campaign, mountains of side quests, deep and engaging combat, great characters, and a full roadmap of free updates coming out this year. But with that being said, a lot of that content can come off as repetitive to the uninitiated, so I'm valuing Monster Hunter Stories 2 Wings of Ruin at $51, and I'm excited to see how its value can rise as more content gets released for it. I hope you enjoyed this review of Monster Hunter Stories 2 Wings of Ruin. Come see me on Twitch where you can watch our reviews in progress 5 nights a week. As always, don't forget to like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments what you thought about it. Until next time, peace!